After a desperate 10-month search, when Rachel finally rescued her daughter Rayleigh from the clutches of a kidnapper, she believed their nightmare had ended. With the abductor behind bars, mother and daughter could begin to cope with the absence of her twin sister and slowly rebuild their shattered lives. But neither Rachel nor the authorities knew the full extent of the criminal network operating in this small North Carolina coastal town, a widespread child exploitation ring far bigger than anyone suspected. Soon, mother and daughter would be thrust back into the same nightmare they desperately tried to escape, with the criminal organization that had already claimed one of Rachel's twins now targeting her surviving daughter once again. Before we dive into part 2 of this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. 2 months had passed since that harrowing day at the ferry terminal when Rachel Marin had miraculously found her daughter Rayleigh after almost a year of desperate searching. 2 months of police interviews, psychological evaluations, and legal proceedings. 2 months of nightmares, therapy sessions, and hushed conversations behind closed doors while her daughter slept fitfully in the next room. The small house they now occupied felt nothing like home. Nestled at the edge of a quiet North Carolina town, the narrow 2-bedroom structure was surrounded by trees that cast long shadows across the yard. Security cameras monitored every approach, their red lights blinking steadily through the night. Federal agents rotated shifts outside, a constant reminder that the danger hadn't fully passed. Inside, the walls were bare, except for the drawings Rayleigh created each day. Dozens of them, taped haphazardly around her bedroom and spilling into the hallway. Not landscapes or people as one might expect from a 9-year-old, but fragments. A fence post standing alone against white paper, a single light bulb hanging from nothing. A green van partially visible behind trees, a shoe abandoned in dirt. Rachel preserved each one, handling them carefully as if they might disintegrate at her touch. She recognized them for what they were, pieces of memory too painful to express in words. Since her rescue, Rayleigh hadn't spoken more than necessary. In the courtroom, during the initial hearings against Douglas Kearns and his wife Kathy Evans, she had remained completely silent. Not when the prosecutor gently asked her name, not when the judge offered a soft nod of encouragement, not even when Rachel sat just feet away, trying not to cry as her daughter stared at the table with blank eyes. The girl who had once vanished into the sea and come back was now lost in an entirely different way. So far, the legal proceedings had continued without her testimony. The prosecution had built their case on physical evidence, photographs recovered from Kearns's digital storage, the magazines found in the trunk of his car, forensic analysis of the suitcase containing Millie's remains, and testimony from other witnesses, including Curtis Bannister, the fisherman who found the suitcase, and the ferry officers who assisted in Rayleigh's rescue. Rachel had testified multiple times, recounting the day her daughters disappeared from the cruise ship, the 10 months of searching, and the discovery of Millie's remains. Each time she spoke, Douglas Kearns sat motionless at the defense table, occasionally smirking, occasionally stone-faced, but never showing remorse. This morning, the quiet of their safe house was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Rachel checked the security monitor beside the entrance before opening it to reveal Detective Mace Alvarez and a woman Rachel recognized as Elena Cruz, the child trauma specialist assigned to Rayleigh's case. "Good morning, Rachel," Alvarez said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much darkness. "May we come in?" Rachel nodded, stepping aside to let them enter. She'd grown accustomed to these visits over the past months, law enforcement and support staff coming and going, bringing updates on the case and checking on Rayleigh's progress. Elena carried a leather portfolio clutched to her chest. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her warm brown eyes scanning the room before settling on Rachel. "How is she today?" she asked softly. "The same," Rachel replied, leading them to the living room where morning sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds. "She's been drawing since dawn." Rayleigh sat by the window, her small frame silhouetted against the light, bent over a sketch pad. She didn't look up when they entered, continuing to draw with determined focus, her dark hair falling forward to hide her face. "Rayleigh, Detective Alvarez and Miss Cruz are here," Rachel said gently. Rayleigh's hand paused briefly over her drawing, but she didn't turn. Elena took a seat nearby, keeping a respectful distance. "That's a beautiful drawing, Rayleigh. May I see what you're working on?" Rachel glanced at Alvarez, who remained standing, his posture tense. "What brings you here today?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Elena set her portfolio on the coffee table and extracted a folder. "The trial begins today," she said. "The federal human trafficking trial. If Rayleigh is ready, this would be her chance to testify." Rachel's stomach tightened. "We haven't discussed it again since the last hearing," she said, glancing at her daughter. "She's still very much affected by everything." Alvarez cleared his throat. "I understand your concerns, Rachel, but this trial is different from the preliminary hearings. High-profile jurors, federal prosecutors. It's the case that will determine not just whether Kearns and his wife are guilty, we all know they are, but what their sentences will be." Rachel nodded, knowing what was at stake. The charges against Douglas Kearns were extensive. First-degree murder for Millie's death, which in North Carolina carried penalties of either death or life imprisonment without parole. Kidnapping of a minor, a Class C felony facing at least 19 years per count. Possession and production of child pornography, carrying 20 years per count. Unlawful confinement, child endangerment, and disposal of a body adding another 10 years. If sentenced consecutively, Kearns faced life without parole plus over 100 years, or potentially the death penalty if the DA pursued it and the jury agreed. "Will her testimony really make a difference?" she asked without looking up. "You seem to have enough evidence." "It would," Alvarez said, leaning against the counter. "But honestly, Rachel, we do have enough to put Kearns away for life either way. The DA believes the death penalty is warranted and the evidence supports it, but juries can be unpredictable. Rayleigh's testimony would remove any doubt." "Maybe it's better if he gets life," Rachel said quietly. "Death would be too quick for him. I want him to suffer, to know what it's like to be confined, to have your freedom taken away, just like my daughters experienced." Alvarez didn't respond immediately, his gaze drifting toward the living room where Elena sat with Rayleigh, speaking in low, gentle tones. "What about the others?" Rachel asked, changing the subject. "The people Douglas worked with on those magazines? Have you identified any of them?" "We're still investigating. Evans has given us some names, locations. It's complicated. These operations are deliberately fragmented to protect those at the top, but we're making progress." Rachel nodded, then fell silent. They saw Elena still speaking softly to Rayleigh, who remained focused on her drawing. The child trauma specialist looked up as they entered. "Rayleigh and I have been talking about what it means to share our stories," Elena explained. "About how sometimes, even when it's hard, telling people what happened to us can help others who might still be scared or in danger." Rachel took a seat near her daughter. "No one expects you to do this, sweetheart. Not if you're not ready." "I've explained that if she doesn't want to speak today, that's completely okay," Elena said. "The evidence is strong, and the other children who were rescued will be testifying as well." Alvarez checked his watch. "The trial starts in a few hours. We should head back soon if—" "I want to go." All three adults turned in surprise at the sound of Rayleigh's voice, so rarely heard these days. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Rachel asked, her heart racing. Rayleigh set down her pencil and looked up, her eyes meeting her mother's for the first time that morning. "I want to speak today." Elena leaned forward slightly. "Rayleigh, that's very brave of you, but I want you to know you don't have to force yourself." "I'm not," Rayleigh said, her voice small but determined. "I think Millie would want me to. I think she'd want people to know what happened." Her fingers traced the outline of the courthouse she'd drawn. "I want to be brave like Millie was." Rachel felt tears burning behind her eyes. She reached out and gently took her daughter's hand. "Are you sure?" "It will be difficult?" Rayleigh nodded. "I need to do this, Mom, for Millie, and for the other kids who might still be out there." Elena smiled encouragingly. "You're already being very brave, Rayleigh, and I'll be right there with you the entire time. Your mom will be just a few feet away." Detective Alvarez stood, pulling out his phone. "I'll call ahead. Let them know Rayleigh will be testifying today." He stepped into the hallway to make the call. Rachel squeezed her daughter's hand. "Let's get you ready then." As they prepared, Elena explained what would happen in the courtroom, who would be there, what questions might be asked, how Rayleigh could ask for a break if she needed one. Rachel listened while helping Rayleigh choose appropriate clothes, a simple blue dress with a light cardigan, comfortable shoes, her hair neatly brushed and secured with the butterfly clips she'd always favored. When they were ready, Rachel stood in the doorway of Rayleigh's bedroom, watching as her daughter carefully placed her sketch pad and pencils in a small backpack. Despite the circumstances, a surge of pride warmed Rachel's chest. After everything Rayleigh had endured, she was still finding courage. They walked together to the living room where Alvarez and Elena waited. Without a word, they left the safe house and got into Alvarez's unmarked police car. They arrived at the courthouse, a towering structure of limestone and glass that seemed to loom over them as they approached. Elena guided Rayleigh and Rachel through a private entrance, bypassing the media gathered outside. The courtroom was cold, both in temperature and atmosphere. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above as the federal courtroom hushed for the afternoon testimony. The jury sat still, their eyes already wearied by the images and reports from the morning's proceedings. Rachel sat just behind the prosecution's bench, hands trembling softly in her lap, watching her daughter ascend the witness stand for the first time. Rayleigh looked small on the stand. Her hair was brushed neatly, her clothes simple and soft-colored, chosen to bring comfort. She didn't glance at anyone, not her mother, not the jury, only the folded hands resting in her lap. The courtroom held its breath as the prosecutor approached gently, voice calm. Rayleigh's voice broke the silence, wavering but clear. "He told me to stand there and not move. He was trying to put Millie in the suitcase. She didn't fit. He twisted her arms until it cracked. I think it was her shoulder." Rachel clenched the edge of her seat, her breath catching. Several jurors turned away briefly. "He said if I screamed or ran, he'd break mine too." Rayleigh swallowed hard. The microphone picked up every tiny sound. "He made me sit in the corner while he zipped it shut. Then he pushed it under the bed. I had to sleep in the same room with it that night." Rayleigh's eyes remained downcast, her small voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "I couldn't sleep, so he injected me with something. Then the next morning when I woke up, the suitcase was missing and Millie was gone." Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the arms of the chair. The prosecution approached again, this time with a different line of questioning. The screen beside the jury lit up with blurred evidence from the recovered digital files, carefully edited to preserve dignity, but still chilling. "Do you recognize any of these items or places, Rayleigh?" the prosecutor asked gently. She nodded. "That's the yellow blanket from the camper, and that's the house, Cedar Island. We were going there with the ferry that day when Mom found me." A collective hush followed. The judge leaned slightly forward. "They took pictures there," Rayleigh continued, "in a back room with black curtains, and sometimes outside, where no one could see. They gave us things to drink. I think it made us sleepy. Or slow. The ones who did what they were told got food. I remember they gave me a grilled cheese sandwich when I smiled right." Rayleigh's eyes stayed down. She spoke like reading from a page that had long been carved into her memory. "Sometimes we got 3 days of food if we didn't cry." A murmur moved through the courtroom. A juror wiped her cheek. The defense lawyer sat frozen, not daring to object. As the judge called a break, people began to file out. The doors opened. Rachel rose slowly, steadying herself, her chest tight from what she'd just heard. She reached for her coat when she noticed a man sitting alone near the back row, his face unreadable. He wasn't familiar, but he was staring, not at Rachel, but at Rayleigh. Unmoving, cold. His eyes never blinked. Then, without a word, he stood and walked quickly toward the exit doors. Rachel's instincts flared. She moved fast, weaving through the scattering crowd, trying to keep her eyes on the back of his jacket. Her heart pounded, not out of fear, but urgency. She reached the doors just as they swung shut, and then Rayleigh's cry pierced the hallway. Rachel turned. Rayleigh was in the arms of Elena Cruz, shaking and sobbing uncontrollably. Her eyes locked on her mother, reaching for her, not with words, but terror. Rachel froze. One more step, and she could have followed the man. But she didn't. She turned back. The man was gone. She returned to her daughter. "Please don't go, Mom," Rayleigh sobbed, clutching at Rachel's blouse. "Don't leave me." Rachel apologized profusely, holding Rayleigh close. When her daughter finally calmed down, she asked if she knew who that man was. Rayleigh shook her head, then said, "I want to go home," wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Elena Cruz, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward. "Of course, Rayleigh, you've been so brave today, and you've helped enormously. I'll let the judge know that you've completed your testimony." Police officers escorted them through a private exit to avoid the press, leading them to a waiting car that would take them back to the safe house. As they drove away from the courthouse, Rachel held Rayleigh close, her thoughts torn between relief that the testimony was over and unease about the man she'd seen watching her daughter. Something about his focused stare had triggered her maternal alarm bells, the same instinct that had told her, months ago at the ferry terminal, that her daughter was in the back seat of Douglas Kern's car. They arrived back at the safe house, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the front yard. As the police escort drove away, Rachel guided Rayleigh inside, locking the door behind them and enabling the security system. "Why don't I make us some hot chocolate?" Rachel suggested, trying to lighten the mood. "You did so well today, honey." Rayleigh sat at the small table, her sketch pad open before her, but for once she wasn't drawing. Instead, she stared out at the trees that surrounded their safe house, her expression pensive. "Mom," she said hesitantly, "do you think we could go somewhere today? Not the courthouse. Just somewhere else." "Like where, sweetheart?" "I saw a camping ground on our way back yesterday. It looked peaceful. Maybe we could have a picnic?" Rachel looked up from the kitchen, surprised. Rayleigh had shown little interest in going anywhere since they'd moved to the safe house. "I don't know, sweetheart," Rachel said hesitantly. "I'm feeling troubled by that man we saw at the courtroom. I'd rather we stay safe here." Rayleigh's shoulders slumped slightly. "Okay." Rachel felt a pang of guilt. She went to the kitchen and began making them a quick lunch of grilled cheese sandwiches, Rayleigh's favorite since childhood, though the food now carried darker associations after her testimony today. As the sandwiches sizzled in the pan, Rachel checked her phone and saw a text message from Elena. "Thank you again for Rayleigh's bravery to testify. Her testimony shed a deeper light for the jury and community on how serious this case is, supporting our target to aim for life imprisonment for Douglas. There will be another trial tomorrow. Your presence would be valuable." Rachel stared at the message, then looked over at Rayleigh, who had retrieved a box of crayons and a coloring book from the living room and was heading to her bedroom. This shouldn't be the kind of life for her daughter, shuttling between a safe house and courtrooms, reliving her trauma over and over. She texted Elena back, "I'll consider it and talk with Rayleigh. Thank you for your support today." After sending the message, she went to Rayleigh's bedroom doorway. Her daughter sat cross-legged on the floor, meticulously coloring a picture of a forest scene. "Hey," Rachel said softly. "What do you think about having lunch at that camping ground like you suggested? You're right. We can't stay cooped up in here forever. Not many people know us here, and maybe it would be good to shake off some of the stress from today." Rayleigh looked up, surprise and excitement briefly lighting up her face. "Really? We can go?" "Really," Rachel confirmed with a smile. "But let's be careful. Wear your hat and that long cardigan and pants. We need to maintain our low profile, and I'll inform Detective Alvarez about it." Rayleigh nodded earnestly, already getting to her feet. Rachel returned to the kitchen, finished preparing their lunch, and packed everything into a small cooler along with some drinks and fruit. She added a blanket and some hand sanitizer, then grabbed her purse and the car keys. She checked her phone one last time and saw a confirmation text from the detective. "Just keep a low profile and make sure your phone is fully charged. I'll have an officer do a drive-by check once an hour." When everything was ready, they walked out of the house and got into the car that the police had lent them. The camping ground wasn't far away. In less than 20 minutes, they arrived at a peaceful clearing surrounded by tall pines with simple wooden picnic tables scattered throughout. Being a weekday afternoon, the place was nearly deserted. Rachel chose a table at the edge of the clearing, far from the few other visitors. She set up their lunches while Rayleigh watched a pair of cardinals flitting between branches overhead. In peaceful quiet, they enjoyed the open air. They had remained indoors for weeks, and with everything going on, their days had felt so gloomy. This short getaway, with the nice cool weather, was a brief relief. "Would you be willing to come to court again tomorrow?" Rachel asked eventually, watching Rayleigh carefully. Rayleigh took a small bite of her sandwich, considering the question. "I think I can do it," she said finally. Then, after a pause, "Mom, when will all this end? Is this my normal life now?" Rachel reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "The worst has passed, and from here on, things will get better. But it takes time. There are still months of court trials like this, but it's important to make sure the bad people can't hurt us again." Rayleigh's eyes grew distant. "Then why am I still feeling unsafe, Mom? You know, Douglas and his wife weren't the only ones. There are still those people who took my pictures." Rachel's face turned serious. She knew about this. Detective Alvarez and the police were still pursuing and investigating because apparently, even though the studio and some of the people and cameramen had been caught by police at Cedar Island, they all knew the police hadn't gotten to the main operation. "They will catch those men in time," Rachel tried to comfort her. "Those people must be hiding now with police on their tails." They finished their lunch in companionable silence, and then Rayleigh said she wanted to grab a cool drink from the cooler in the car. Rachel immediately stood up. "I'm coming with you," she said. Rachel had never let her daughter go out of sight anymore. They walked back to the parking lot where their car sat alone beneath a cluster of pine trees. As they approached, Rachel noticed something tucked beneath the windshield wiper, a slim rectangular object that definitely hadn't been there when they arrived. "Wait here," she told Rayleigh, immediately on guard. Rachel approached the car cautiously, scanning the surrounding area for any sign of movement. The parking lot and nearby camping spaces remained quiet. She reached the car and carefully extracted what appeared to be a magazine rolled into a tight cylinder. As she unrolled it, her heart nearly stopped. The cover featured a photo of Rayleigh, not a recent one, but clearly taken during her captivity. The child in the image was posed provocatively, her face recognizable, despite makeup that made her look older. The magazine title was in a language Rachel didn't recognize, but the meaning was unmistakable. Rachel quickly re-rolled the magazine, fighting the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. She turned to check on Rayleigh, who stood several yards away, as instructed, a confused expression on her face. "Mom, what's that?" Rayleigh called. "Who put it on your car?" Rachel stuffed the magazine into her bag, her mind racing. "Nothing, sweetheart. Probably just an advertisement." She forced a smile she didn't feel. "Let's get your drink and head back to the house. I think we've had enough fresh air for today." But as she opened the car door to retrieve the cooler, a chill ran down her spine. Someone had found them here, someone who knew who they were, and had access to the exploitation materials featuring Rayleigh, someone who wanted them to know they were being watched. "Mom?" Rayleigh had moved closer, her expression fearful. "What's wrong?" Before Rachel could answer, the sound of an approaching vehicle caught her attention. A green van pulled into the parking lot, moving slowly along the row of empty spaces before stopping about 50 feet from their car. Rachel froze, memories of Douglas Kearns's vehicle flashing through her mind. She reached for Rayleigh, pulling her daughter close as the van's side door slid open. Two men emerged, both wearing dark clothing, their faces partially obscured by baseball caps. They moved with purpose, heading directly toward Rachel and Rayleigh. "Get in the car," Rachel whispered urgently to her daughter, fumbling for her keys. But before they could reach safety, the men closed the distance. One grabbed Rayleigh's arm, yanking her away from Rachel with such force that the child cried out in pain. "No!" Rachel lunged forward, seizing her daughter's hand and refusing to let go. "Help! Someone help us!" The second man shouted to the driver, "Go! Go! Go!" The van lurched forward even as the men struggled to pull Rayleigh inside. Rachel ran alongside, still clutching her daughter's hand, her feet scrambling for purchase on the gravel. "Bring the mother, too," one man shouted. "The boss can deal with her later." The other hesitated, then yelled to the driver, "No! Reverse and hit her. End her right here." The van suddenly shifted into reverse, its tires screeching on the pavement. Rachel saw what was coming but couldn't let go of Rayleigh. Not again. Never again. The impact sent her flying backward onto the asphalt, her grip on Rayleigh finally broken. Pain exploded through her body as she hit the ground hard. Through blurred vision, she saw one of the men aim something at her. A gun. She rolled to the side just as the shot cracked through the air, the bullet striking the pavement inches from her head. The van's door slammed shut with Rayleigh inside, her terrified face pressed against the window, mouth open in a silent scream as the vehicle accelerated away. Rachel staggered to her feet, blood streaming from cuts on her face where she'd struck the ground. Her ribs screamed in protest, but adrenaline pushed her forward. She lurched toward their car, fumbling with the keys, desperate not to lose sight of the van that was rapidly disappearing down the access road. Inside the car, she started the engine with trembling hands and floored the accelerator, tires spinning on the gravel before finding purchase. She grabbed her phone from the center console and dialed Detective Alvarez's number. "They took her!" she screamed when he answered. "Men in a green van just took Rayleigh." "Where are you?" Alvarez demanded, his voice sharp with urgency. "The camping ground near Lake Morris. I'm following them, headed east on the access road toward the highway." "Rachel, don't engage with them. They're armed and dangerous. Pull over and wait for backup." "There's no way I'm letting them take my daughter again," Rachel shouted, swerving around a curve to keep the van in sight. She shared her live location with Alvarez. "Track me. I'm not losing them." The green van weaved through sparse traffic, clearly trying to shake her pursuit. Rachel stayed with them, ignoring the pain that radiated through her body with every bump and turn. Blood from her forehead dripped into her left eye, partially obscuring her vision, but she refused to slow down. The chase continued for miles, the countryside giving way to more isolated terrain, marshy areas with fewer homes and businesses. The cell signal on her phone weakened, dropping to a single bar as they entered a remote area. Eventually, the van turned onto a narrow dirt road that led toward what appeared to be an old, disused dock. Rachel followed at a distance, her heart pounding as she saw the van stop beside a weathered wooden structure extending into a murky inlet. A second vehicle was already parked there, a black sedan, and a small motorboat was tied to the dock. She watched in horror as the men dragged Rayleigh from the van toward the boat. Her daughter was struggling, her small body twisting against their grip, but they were too strong. Rachel made a split-second decision. She stopped her car 100 yards back, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, and slipped out quietly. There was no time to wait for Alvarez and his team. If those men got Rayleigh onto that boat, she might never see her daughter again. She crept forward through the tall grass beside the dirt road, staying low, using the sparse tree cover for concealment. When she'd closed half the distance to the dock, one of the men looked in her direction, his hand moving to his waistband where Rachel had seen the gun. She froze, holding her breath, but it was too late. He'd spotted her. "Over there!" he shouted, pointing in her direction. Rachel abandoned stealth and broke into a run, sprinting toward the dock where Rayleigh was being forced into the boat. "Rayleigh!" she screamed. Two men intercepted her before she could reach the water's edge. They tackled her to the ground, knocking the wind from her lungs. As she struggled to breathe, rough hands bound her wrists with plastic zip ties. They dragged her toward the boat where Rayleigh sat, huddled in the stern, her face streaked with tears. When she saw her mother, she reached out with bound hands. "Mom!" The apparent leader of the group, a stocky man with a pockmarked face, cursed under his breath. "Search her, then get rid of her car and phone." They roughly went through Rachel's pockets, confiscating her phone and car keys. One man crushed the phone under his boot before removing the battery and tossing both pieces into the murky water. Another took her car keys and headed back up the path. "If you want to be with your daughter all the way to the grave, so be it," the leader said, shoving Rachel into the boat beside Rayleigh. The engine roared to life, and the boat pulled away from the dock, heading deeper into the maze of waterways that characterize this part of coastal North Carolina. Rachel managed to shift closer to Rayleigh, leaning so their shoulders touched, the only comfort she could offer with her hands bound behind her back. "I'm here," she whispered. "I won't leave you." Rayleigh's tear-filled eyes met hers, terror and a terrible resignation reflected in their depths. "They'll kill us both now," she whispered, "like they killed Millie." Rachel shook her head, ignoring the pain from her injuries. "Number Detective Alvarez knows where we were. He'll find us." But as the boat accelerated away from the mainland, putting more distance between them and any potential rescue, even Rachel struggled to believe her own words. The boat cut through the water for nearly an hour, following a complex route through marshlands and narrow channels before the open sea came into view. Rachel and Rayleigh remained bound and gagged, seated in the stern under the watchful eye of two armed men while a third navigated. They had placed duct tape over Rayleigh's mouth after she'd tried to scream when they passed another boat. Rachel's mouth was similarly sealed, the adhesive pulling painfully at the cuts on her face. The men conversed quietly among themselves, occasionally glancing at their captives with expressions ranging from indifference to open malice. "Boss gonna be mad we brought the mother," one said, a lanky man with a prison tattoo visible on his neck. "What choice did we have?" replied another, the same pockmarked man who had given orders at the dock. "She saw our faces, followed us, nearly got herself shot. Better to let him decide what to do with her." "Maybe he'll use her too," a third suggested with a cruel smile. "Older models don't sell as well, but there's always a market for mother-daughter sets." The others laughed, and Rachel felt bile rise in her throat. These men weren't just kidnappers. They were part of the same trafficking operation that had taken her daughters from the cruise ship almost a year ago. Rayleigh trembled against her, and Rachel wished desperately that she could put her arms around her child, protect her from the horror they were facing. Instead, all she could do was press closer, trying to convey through that small contact that she wasn't alone. Eventually, an island came into view, larger than the small patches of sand and marsh grass they had passed, with actual structures visible near the shoreline. As they approached, Rachel could make out a small dock with several other boats moored beside it. "Home sweet home," the navigator announced, reducing speed as they entered the shallow water near the dock. Rachel tried to memorize every detail of their surroundings, searching for landmarks or anything that might help identify their location if they managed to escape or contact help. The island appeared largely undeveloped except for a cluster of buildings set back from the shore among the trees. Once docked, the men roughly hauled them from the boat. Rachel stumbled on legs numb from sitting in one position too long, and they laughed as she struggled to stay upright. Rayleigh was more steady, apparently accustomed to being transported this way from her previous captivity. "Move," the pockmarked man ordered, shoving Rachel forward. They were marched up a sandy path toward a structure that resembled a warehouse, a plain, rectangular building with few windows and metal siding that had been weathered by salt air. As they approached, Rachel heard the unmistakable sound of machinery coming from inside. The main entrance led directly into a large open space filled with industrial printing equipment. Workers in gray coveralls operated the machines, which were churning out glossy magazine pages. With horror, Rachel realized she was looking at the production facility for the very magazines that had featured her daughter. On the nearest conveyor belt, stacks of magazines were being assembled, their covers displaying children in poses that made Rachel's stomach turn. And there, among the latest issues waiting to be bound, was one with Rayleigh's photograph, the same image that had been left on their car at the camping ground. Rayleigh had seen it too. She made a muffled sound behind her gag, her eyes wide with recognition and terror. They were led past the printing floor to a corridor that branched off from the main space. The men took them through a series of turns, finally stopping at a door with a small, darkened window. One of them unlocked it and pushed it open, revealing a sparsely furnished room with 2 chairs in the center. "Sit," the pockmarked man ordered, cutting the zip ties on their wrists, only to immediately secure them to the chairs with rope. Rachel winced as circulation returned to her hands, the sensation like 1,000 needles pricking her skin. One of the men removed the tape from her mouth, taking no care to minimize the pain as it tore away from her cuts. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded as soon as she could speak. "You know the police are looking for us. They'll find this place." The men ignored her, adjusting the ropes to ensure neither she nor Rayleigh could move. "Boss will be here soon," one said to the others. "He'll want to talk to them before we finish the job." They left, the heavy door closing with an ominous click as the lock engaged. Rachel immediately began working at the ropes binding her wrists, twisting and pulling despite the pain. "Rayleigh, are you hurt?" she asked, her eyes scanning her daughter for any visible injuries. Rayleigh shook her head, her mouth still covered with tape. Rachel wished they'd removed it, but perhaps it was better this way. She didn't want Rayleigh to see how frightened she truly was. "We're going to be okay," Rachel said, with far more confidence than she felt. "Detective Alvarez knows we're missing. He'll be looking for us." Rayleigh's eyes held a knowledge beyond her years. She understood their situation all too well from her previous captivity. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they waited in the silent room. Finally, the door opened, and a man in an expensive suit entered. He was tall and lean, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of tan that spoke of leisure time on yachts, rather than honest work in the sun. His shoes, Italian leather, Rachel guessed, clicked softly on the concrete floor as he approached. Behind him came 2 of the men who had kidnapped them, standing at attention near the door. The suited man studied Rachel for a long moment before turning his attention to Rayleigh. With surprising gentleness, he removed the tape from the child's mouth. "Hello again, Rayleigh," he said, his voice cultured and calm. "I'd hoped we wouldn't meet again under these circumstances." "Who are you?" Rachel demanded. "What do you want with my daughter?" The man turned to her, his expression almost regretful. "My name is Leo Barbos, and to be perfectly honest, Mrs. Marin, I don't have anything personal against either of you. This is simply business." "Business?" Rachel spat the word. "Kidnapping children is business to you?" Barbos sighed, as if explaining something to a particularly dense student. "The business is giving people what they're willing to pay for. Unfortunately, your daughter became part of that business when Douglas Kearns brought her to us nearly a year ago." "You're the one Douglas and his wife worked for," Rachel realized. "You run this operation." "I prefer to think of myself as a publisher," Barbos said with a thin smile. Douglas was a supplier, not a particularly good one in the end. His carelessness has cost me significantly. He turned to Rayleigh. "You were always such a sweet, quiet child. You should have stayed that way." Rayleigh stared back at him, her expression a mixture of fear and defiance. "My associate was in the courtroom yesterday," Barbos continued. "He reported that you've been talking, not just about Douglas, but about our little enterprise here. That presents a problem for me." "The police already know about you," Rachel said. "They're investigating. It's only a matter of time before they find this place." "Perhaps," Barbos acknowledged, "but your daughter's testimony accelerates that timeline considerably. The authorities have been sniffing around our operation for months, but without specific details, they've had little success. Now, with Rayleigh talking," he spread his hands. "I'm a businessman, Mrs. Marin. I deal in risk management and loss mitigation. Your daughter has become a liability I can no longer afford." The cold, matter-of-fact way he discussed murdering a child sent shivers down Rachel's spine. "You won't get away with this," she said, struggling against her restraints. "Detective Alvarez tracked us to the camping ground. He'll find this island." "By the time he does, if he does, there will be nothing left to find," Barbos replied. "We've weathered investigations before. Assets move, operations relocate, business continues." He checked his watch. "Now, since time is limited, I think we should proceed." He nodded to the men at the door. "Take them to the studio. The girl first. The mother can watch from the viewing room." "What are you going to do?" Rachel asked, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. "Making the best of an unfortunate situation," Barbos said. "Rayleigh's last photo session will be quite special. There's a dedicated audience for darker material, and since we need to dispose of her anyway, we might as well maximize the profit." Rachel lunged against her restraints, the chair rocking but not tipping. "You monster!" "She's a child." Barbos didn't respond to her outburst. He simply turned and left the room as the two men untied Rayleigh from her chair, keeping her wrists bound, and dragged her toward the door. "No!" Rachel screamed. "Rayleigh!" "Mom!" Rayleigh's voice broke as she was pulled away. "Don't leave me!" But the door closed, cutting off Rachel's response, and Rachel was left alone with the terrible knowledge of what these men planned to do to her daughter. Two men returned to the room where Rachel remained bound to the chair. Without speaking, they untied her from the chair, but kept her wrists secured behind her back with zip ties. They marched her out of the room and down a different corridor, moving deeper into the building rather than back toward the printing area. Rachel tried to memorize the route, but the hallways all looked alike. Plain, industrial, with identical unmarked doors at regular intervals. They finally stopped at one such door, which one of the men unlocked before shoving her inside. The room was empty except for a metal folding chair facing a large television screen mounted on the wall. Unlike the room where they'd been held before, this one had something else that immediately caught Rachel's eye, a rope hanging from a hook in the ceiling, with a noose already tied at the end. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice breaking slightly. One of the men, the taller of the two, gestured to the chair. "For now, you get to watch. Later, you can use that rope yourself, or we'll use it for you. Either way, that's how this ends for you." Rachel felt bile rise in her throat. "You're going to make me watch whatever you're doing to my daughter, and then expect me to hang myself?" The second man shrugged. "Boss says to give you the option. More humane, he thinks. But it doesn't matter to us how you go." He pointed to the television. "That's live feed from the studio where your kid is. Enjoy the show." They pushed her into the chair, though they didn't tie her to it. The zip ties on her wrists remained, however, limiting her options for escape. Before leaving, one of the men pointed to a small red button beside the door. "That's a panic button. Press it if you want company. Otherwise, nobody'll bother you till the session's over." The door closed with a heavy click as the lock engaged. Rachel immediately tried the handle, but it was securely locked from outside. She turned her attention to the room, searching desperately for anything she could use to free herself or as a weapon. There was nothing. The walls were bare concrete, the floor similarly unadorned. The only furniture was the metal chair and the television, which was bolted to the wall and encased in a protective metal housing to prevent tampering. The rope hung just a few feet away, its very presence a mockery of hope, an invitation to end her own suffering before they did it for her. Rachel sank onto the chair, her mind racing. Was Detective Alvarez tracking them? Had he found the abandoned campsite, her damaged phone, the signs of struggle? How long would it take him to locate this island, hidden among countless others in the coastal waterways? The television screen suddenly flickered to life, drawing her attention with horrific inevitability. The camera showed a room she hadn't seen before, a dimly lit space with concrete walls much like the one she occupied, but decorated in a macabre parody of a prison cell, complete with metal chains hanging from the walls. Rachel's heart stopped as she saw two men dragging Rayleigh into the frame. Her daughter's face was pale with terror, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for escape. A third person entered the view, the man Barbos had called Boss, now wearing latex gloves. He approached Rayleigh with clinical detachment, producing a syringe from his pocket. "No," Rachel whispered, pressing closer to the screen. "No, please, no." She watched in helpless horror as Barbos injected something into Rayleigh's arm. Her daughter's struggle weakened almost immediately, though she remained conscious, her movements becoming sluggish and uncoordinated. "That's it," Barbos said on the screen, his voice tinny through the television speakers. "Just enough to keep you compliant but aware. We want authentic reactions for the camera." One of the men set up professional photography equipment, while another began changing Rayleigh's clothing, dressing her in outfits that made Rachel physically ill to see. Barbos directed the process with the air of someone who had done this many times before, suggesting poses and camera angles with practiced ease. Rachel couldn't bear to watch, yet couldn't tear her eyes away. This was happening to her daughter, right now, in this building. The thought that she was only rooms away, yet unable to help, was unbearable. She forced herself to look away from the screen, instead focusing on the rope hanging in the corner. In that moment, she understood why someone might choose to end their own life rather than endure this kind of helplessness and grief. "If they kill Rayleigh," she whispered to herself, "I'll use that rope. There would be nothing left to live for." Hours passed, marked only by the changing scenes on the television as Barbos and his photographers moved Rayleigh to different parts of the room, different poses, different costumes. The drug they'd given her kept her compliant but conscious, a horrific middle ground that Rachel knew was deliberate, designed to capture fear and suffering in the images they were creating. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her, and she dozed fitfully in the chair, jerking awake each time Rayleigh's voice filtered through the speakers. During one such moment of wakefulness, she noticed something she hadn't before, a small ventilation grate near the floor, partially hidden by the chair. Rachel quickly moved to examine it. The grate was secured with screws, but they appeared old and possibly loose. Without tools, however, she had no way to remove them. She tried using her fingernails, but the screws were too tight, the metal edges cutting into her skin as she tried to turn them. Frustrated, she returned to the chair, her gaze drawn unwillingly back to the television where the nightmare continued. On screen, Barbos appeared to be winding down the session, instructing his men to prepare for the final phase. Rachel knew instinctively what that meant. They were nearly done with the photographs and would soon move on to killing her daughter. Her heart raced with renewed panic. She had to do something, anything, to buy more time. She looked around the room again, this time noticing the light fixture overhead. It was a simple fluorescent panel, recessed into the ceiling, but not flush with it. If she could somehow reach it, perhaps there was wiring she could access. Rachel dragged the chair beneath the light and carefully climbed onto it, balancing precariously with her hands still bound behind her back. Standing on tiptoes, she could just reach the edge of the panel with her fingertips. It moved slightly under her touch. Encouraged, she pushed harder, and one corner of the panel shifted upward, revealing a small gap. But without the use of her hands, she couldn't exploit this potential escape route. She stepped down from the chair, frustration and despair threatening to overwhelm her. Her gaze drifted to the window in the door, small and darkened with a one-way film, but perhaps visible from the outside if someone passed by. Rachel moved to the window, pressing her face against it, searching for any sign of movement in the corridor. It was empty, the silence broken only by the awful sounds from the television. There had to be a way out. There had to be something she could use, some way to free herself and reach Rayleigh before it was too late. She thought of the panic button by the door. Pressing it would bring the guards back, but what then? She had no weapon, no advantage, no plan. As darkness fell outside, casting the room into deeper shadow, Rachel leaned against the wall, sliding down until she sat on the floor. Tears streamed down her face as the horrible reality of their situation pressed in on her. "I'm sorry, Rayleigh," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." A sound at the door snapped her back to alertness. The lock clicked, and the door began to open slowly, carefully. Rachel tensed, preparing for the return of her captors. But the man who slipped inside was not one of those who had brought her here. He was younger, with a nervous energy about him, as he quickly closed the door behind him. "Be quiet," he whispered, placing a finger to his lips as Rachel started to speak. "I'm here to help, but we don't have much time." "Who are you?" Rachel asked, her voice barely audible. "My name is Mavi," he replied, glancing anxiously at the door. "I work here, but I can't do this anymore. I can't let them kill another child." The name struck a chord in Rachel's memory. "Mavi, you were on the cruise with us? Douglas Kearns said his partner backed out. That was you, wasn't it?" He nodded, shame evident in his expression. "I was supposed to help him take both your daughters, but when I saw them, a twin, I couldn't go through with it. I told Douglas to call it off, but he—" Mavi swallowed hard. "He decided to proceed alone. He killed one of your daughters because I refused to help with two." Rachel stared at him, a mixture of hatred and desperate hope warring within her. This man had been part of the plan that destroyed her family, yet now he was offering help when no one else would. "Why are you helping us now?" she demanded. "Because I'm a coward," Mavi said simply. "After that day on the cruise, I tried to run away, but Leo's men found me. They said I was still useful at the factory, even if I was too soft-hearted for field work." He looked directly at Rachel. "I've been living with what happened to your daughters every day since. When I saw you and Rayleigh being brought through the printing area, I knew it could only mean the worst." "They're going to kill her," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "They're drugging her and taking pictures, and then they're going to kill her." "I know," Mavi said grimly. "That room you saw on the screen, they only use it for children they're done with. They even have an incinerator here. They can make people just disappear." "Help me get to her," Rachel pleaded. "Please." Mavi shook his head. "We can't, not alone. There are too many armed men between us and the studio, but I have a plan." He reached into his pocket and produced a small flip phone. "Call the police. Tell them you're on Portsmouth Island. I'll get you to my truck. It's parked at the loading dock. You can hide there until help arrives." "But Rayleigh—" "The police will save her," Mavi insisted. "Leo won't kill her right away. He'll draw it out, maximize the profit from those photos. It's cruel, but it gives us time to bring help." Rachel wanted to argue, to insist they try to rescue Rayleigh immediately, but the rational part of her knew Mavi was right. The two of them, unarmed and with her still bound, had no chance against multiple armed men. "Okay," she agreed reluctantly. "Cut me free." Mavi produced a small pocket knife and carefully cut the zip ties binding her wrists. Rachel gasped as circulation returned fully to her hands, pins and needles shooting through her fingers. "I need to go," Mavi said, handing her the phone. If anyone sees me here, I won't be able to help you. The loading dock is at the back of the building. Turn right when you leave this room instead of going back the way you came. Follow that corridor to the end, and you'll find a door that leads outside." "You're not coming with me?" "I'll meet you at the truck," he promised. "But we can't be seen together. My access card opens all the doors in this section. Go only when the corridor is clear." Rachel nodded, clutching the phone like a lifeline. "Thank you," she said quietly. Mavi's expression was grim. "Don't thank me. I'm part of the reason your family was destroyed. Just go, call for help, and maybe someday I'll be able to live with myself." He slipped out of the room, leaving the door unlocked behind him. Rachel immediately dialed 911, her fingers trembling so badly she had to try twice before getting the numbers right. "911, what's your emergency?" A dispatcher's voice came through the small speaker. "My name is Rachel Marin," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been kidnapped along with my daughter Rayleigh. We're being held on Portsmouth Island at some kind of printing facility. They're going to kill us. Please, send help immediately. And tell Detective Mace Alvarez he's been looking for us." The dispatcher remained calm and professional. "I'm dispatching units now, Mrs. Marin. Can you describe your exact location on the island?" "It's a warehouse-type building near a dock. They print magazines here," Rachel explained, not wanting to go into detail about what kind of magazines. "Please, tell them no sirens. They'll kill my daughter if they know police are coming." "I understand. Stay on the line if you can, Mrs. Marin." "I can't," Rachel replied. "I need to move, to try to get out of the building. Please, just hurry." She ended the call, tucking the phone into her pocket. Taking a deep breath, she cracked open the door and peered into the corridor. It was empty. Following Mavi's instructions, she turned right and began making her way toward what she hoped was freedom and help for Rayleigh. Rachel slipped out of the room, heart hammering against her ribs as she moved cautiously down the corridor. The building was eerily quiet now, the drone of the printing machines silenced for the night. Every few seconds, she paused to listen for footsteps or voices, pressing herself against the wall at the slightest sound. The corridor stretched ahead, its sterile fluorescent lighting casting harsh shadows. She moved as quickly as she dared, following Mavi's directions toward the loading dock. Each door she passed looked identical to the one where Rayleigh was being held, and the thought that her daughter was somewhere in this labyrinth of rooms, drugged and terrified, made her physically ill. Rachel was halfway to the exit when she heard footsteps approaching from around a corner ahead. She froze, looking frantically for somewhere to hide. The corridor offered no alcoves, no side doors within immediate reach. She was completely exposed. The footsteps grew louder. In seconds, whoever was coming would turn the corner and see her. Her eyes fell on a red metal box mounted on the wall nearby, a fire alarm station with a small glass-fronted compartment containing an emergency fire axe. Breaking the glass would set off an alarm, potentially creating chaos that could help her escape. But it would also alert everyone in the building to an emergency, possibly putting Rayleigh in greater danger if her captors decided to dispose of the evidence immediately. Rachel weighed her options in the seconds she had left. If she did nothing, she would certainly be caught. If she broke the glass, she might create a diversion. But at what cost to Rayleigh? As the footsteps reached the corner, Rachel tensed, preparing to make her move toward the fire axe, when suddenly a figure emerged from a side door she hadn't noticed and quickly subdued the approaching person. It was Mavi, and he had just taken down one of the facility's workers. "Quickly!" he hissed, dragging the unconscious man out of sight, "before someone else comes." Rachel hurried to join him, helping pull the worker into what appeared to be a supply closet. "Are you okay?" Mavi asked, securing the door behind them. Rachel nodded, her breathing ragged. "I called the police. They're on their way." "Good. We need to get you to the loading dock before anyone realizes you're gone." Mavi peered out of the closet, checking that the corridor was clear. "Follow me and stay close." They moved swiftly through the remainder of the corridor, finally reaching a heavy metal door marked Emergency Exit, with a warning that an alarm would sound if opened. "Won't that set off an alarm?" Rachel whispered. Mavi shook his head. "It's disabled during work hours to allow smoke breaks. They only activate it at night after the last shift leaves." He pushed the door open carefully, revealing a loading area with several trucks parked in a row. The night air was cool against Rachel's skin as they slipped outside. Mavi led her to a battered delivery truck with the logo of a mainstream magazine publisher on its side, clearly a front for the illegal operation inside. "Get in the back," he instructed, opening the rear doors to reveal a cargo area stacked with boxes. "Hide behind those. I need to drive to the front of the facility to meet the police when they arrive. No matter what happens to me, stay hidden until the police open the truck." Rachel climbed inside, maneuvering between tall stacks of boxes that she realized must contain the magazines produced inside. The thought that her daughter's exploitation was packaged in these very boxes made her stomach turn, but she forced herself to focus on the moment. "What if they stop you before you reach the police?" she asked, as Mavi prepared to close the doors. "Then you'll have to find another way," he said grimly. "But I think I can make it. The guards know me. I make deliveries regularly. They won't question me leaving at night." Before Rachel could say anything else, Mavi closed the doors, plunging her into darkness. A moment later, she heard him climb into the driver's seat, and the engine rumbled to life. The truck lurched forward, and Rachel braced herself against the boxes to avoid making noise as they shifted. Through a small gap in the rear doors, she could see the loading area receding as Mavi drove toward what she presumed was the main access road. The journey seemed agonizingly slow. Every bump in the road threatened to topple the stacks of boxes around her. Every pause made her wonder if they'd been stopped by security. She clutched Mavi's phone, prepared to call 911 again if necessary. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, the truck stopped. Rachel heard voices outside, Mavi speaking to someone, though she couldn't make out the words. Then, suddenly, there were more voices, authoritative ones, and the sound of car doors opening and closing. "Police! Step out of the vehicle with your hands up!" Rachel's heart leaped. They'd made it to the police checkpoint. More muffled conversation followed. Then the rear doors of the truck swung open to reveal several officers with weapons drawn, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. "Rachel Marin?" one called. "Yes!" Rachel scrambled forward, nearly falling in her haste to exit the truck. "I'm Rachel Marin. My daughter is still inside the facility. They're going to kill her." The officers helped her down from the truck, quickly moving her toward a police vehicle where an officer handed her a satellite phone. "It's Detective Alvarez," the officer explained. Rachel grabbed the phone. "Alvarez?" "Rachel, thank God." His voice was tight with tension. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, but Rayleigh is still in there," she said urgently. "They're drugging her, taking pictures, and then they're going to kill her. You have to get to her now." "We've got a tactical team assembling and more backup is on the way, including helicopters," Alvarez assured her. "Stay where you are. You're safe now." "What about Mavi?" Rachel asked, looking around for the man who had helped her escape. "The driver?" "He's being detained for questioning. He says he worked for Barbos but was helping you escape." "That's true," Rachel confirmed. "He gave me his phone, helped me get out. He was supposed to work with Douglas Kearns to kidnap both my daughters from the cruise ship, but he backed out." There was a pause on the other end as Alvarez processed this information. "We'll sort that out later. Right now, our priority is getting Rayleigh safely out of that facility." Rachel watched as more police vehicles arrived, officers establishing a perimeter around the area while tactical team members prepared for entry. In the distance, she could hear the thumping of helicopter rotors approaching. "How did you find us so quickly?" she asked Alvarez. "We were already tracking your movements after you disappeared from the camping ground," he explained. "When your car was reported abandoned near an old dock, we narrowed our search to the surrounding waterways. Your 911 call confirmed the location, and we had units ready to move. Rachel was placed in the back of a police car, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, as a medic treated the cuts and bruises on her face and hands from her earlier fall. From the vehicle, she watched the police operation unfold with agonizing slowness. The minutes stretched into an hour as the tactical team methodically secured the perimeter of the facility. Workers began emerging from the building, hands raised, as police ordered them to lie face down on the ground for processing. Rachel strained to see each face, searching for any sign of Rayleigh or Barbos. Finally, she saw them, the men who had kidnapped her and Rayleigh being let out in handcuffs, followed by the tall man from the courtroom who had been watching them. And there, head bowed but unmistakable in his expensive suit, was Leo Barbos himself, flanked by 2 officers as he was escorted to a waiting police vehicle. But still, no Rayleigh. Rachel's anxiety mounted with each passing minute. Had they hidden her somewhere? Had they carried out their threat despite the police presence? Then she saw movement at the main entrance. Paramedics rushing into the building with a stretcher. Her heart seemed to stop, then race forward at a frantic pace. Minutes later, the paramedics emerged, the stretcher between them bearing a small figure. Even from a distance, Rachel recognized her daughter. Without thinking, she bolted from the police car, ignoring shouts to stay back as she ran toward the stretcher. "Rayleigh!" she cried, reaching the paramedics as they loaded the stretcher into an ambulance boat moored at the facility's dock. Rayleigh lay still, her eyes half closed, an IV already inserted in her arm. When she heard her mother's voice, she turned her head slightly, her gaze unfocused from the drugs still in her system. "Mom?" she murmured. "I'm here, sweetheart," Rachel said, grasping her daughter's hand. "I'm right here." One of the paramedics placed a gentle hand on Rachel's shoulder. "She's been heavily sedated, but her vital signs are stable. We need to get her to the hospital immediately." "I'm coming with her," Rachel stated, not a question, but a fact. The paramedic nodded. "Of course." As they prepared to depart, a police officer approached. "Mrs. Marin, we'll need your statement once you reach the mainland. The authorities there will coordinate with you." Rachel nodded absently, her focus entirely on Rayleigh. "What about Mavi, the man who helped me?" "He's being processed," the officer replied. "His situation is complicated, but given his role in rescuing you and potentially other victims, that will be taken into consideration." Rachel climbed into the ambulance boat beside her daughter, holding Rayleigh's hand as the vessel pulled away from the dock. Behind them, the island facility was now fully illuminated by police lights and helicopter spotlights, its secrets finally exposed to the outside world. As they crossed the dark water toward the mainland, Rachel stroked Rayleigh's hair, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure her daughter could hear through the haze of sedation. "It's over, Rayleigh," she murmured. "Really over this time. They can't hurt you anymore. We're going home." She didn't know yet where home would be or how they would rebuild their lives after all they had endured. But in that moment, with Rayleigh's hand in hers and the island of horrors receding behind them, Rachel allowed herself to feel the first genuine hope she'd experienced since that day on the cruise ship when her world had first shattered. The journey to the mainland took just over an hour. During the crossing, the paramedics worked diligently to stabilize Rayleigh, administering fluids to flush the sedatives from her system and monitoring her vital signs. They also attended to Rachel's injuries, the cuts and scrapes from her fall in the parking lot, the rope burns on her wrists, the bruising along her ribs where the van had struck her. Throughout the journey, Rachel maintained physical contact with her daughter, never letting go of Rayleigh's hand, even as the medics worked around her. Whenever Rayleigh's eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened, Rachel would lean close, assuring her they were safe. "We're going to the hospital, sweetheart," she explained during one such moment of lucidity. "The doctors are going to help you feel better." Rayleigh's response was slurred, the drugs still heavy in her system. "They took pictures? Bad ones?" "I know," Rachel soothed, stroking her daughter's hair. "But the police have those men now. They won't hurt you or any other children again." As the boat approached the mainland, Rachel could see flashing lights waiting at the dock, ambulances, police vehicles, and what appeared to be several unmarked government cars. The moment they docked, a team of emergency medical personnel swarmed the boat, transferring Rayleigh to a waiting gurney with practiced efficiency. "We're taking her to Cape Memorial Hospital," one informed Rachel. "It's the nearest facility with a pediatric emergency unit." Rachel climbed into the ambulance beside her daughter, grateful when the paramedics didn't insist she travel separately despite her own injuries. The ambulance sped through the quiet streets, sirens wailing into the night. At the hospital, Rayleigh was immediately brought to the emergency room, where a team of doctors and nurses converged around her, checking her condition and beginning treatment. Rachel was reluctantly led to a separate examination room, where her injuries were properly cleaned and bandaged. "You have a mild concussion and 3 bruised ribs," the doctor informed her after completing his examination. "Nothing broken, fortunately, but you'll be in pain for several days. I'd like to keep you overnight for observation." "I need to be with my daughter," Rachel insisted, already sliding off the examination table. The doctor seemed about to argue, then nodded in understanding. "I'll prescribe pain medication and have a nurse check on you periodically. But please, Mrs. Marin, don't push yourself too hard. Your daughter needs you healthy." Rachel thanked him, then made her way to the pediatric emergency unit where Rayleigh was being treated. A nurse directed her to a treatment room where she found her daughter connected to various monitors, an IV drip steadily feeding clear fluid into her arm. A female doctor was making notes on a chart nearby. "Mom," Rayleigh whispered when she saw Rachel, her voice stronger than it had been on the boat. Rachel approached the bed, carefully taking her daughter's hand. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." The doctor looked up, offering a sympathetic smile. "Mrs. Marin, I'm Dr. Lydia Chen, the pediatric emergency specialist on duty. Your daughter is stable, but I'd like to discuss her condition with you." Rachel nodded, not releasing Rayleigh's hand. "Of course." "The good news is that the sedatives they administered appear to be standard medical-grade drugs, not something more dangerous," Dr. Chen explained quietly. "We're flushing them from her system with IV fluids, and she should be fully alert by morning." "And the other effects?" Rachel asked, her voice dropping to ensure Rayleigh couldn't hear clearly. "The physical trauma?" Dr. Chen's expression grew more serious. "We've completed a thorough examination. There are ligature marks on her wrists and ankles consistent with restraints, and some bruising on her arms and legs from rough handling. She's significantly underweight and showing signs of long-term stress and malnutrition, but those are issues we were already addressing from her previous captivity." The doctor hesitated, then continued in an even softer voice. "We've found no evidence of sexual assault, if that's what you're asking. The exploitation appears to have been limited to photography." Rachel closed her eyes briefly, a wave of relief washing over her. At least Rayleigh had been spared that particular horror. "We'd like to keep her for at least 48 hours, Dr. Chen continued. "Not just for physical recovery, but also to begin psychological assessment. This second trauma coming so soon after her initial rescue, it's going to require specialized care." "Whatever she needs," Rachel agreed. "Just tell me how I can help her." Dr. Chen squeezed her shoulder gently. "Being here is the most important thing you can do right now. Your presence reassures her that she's safe." As the doctor left to check on other patients, Rachel pulled a chair close to Rayleigh's bedside, settling in for the night. Behind her, a police officer stood guard at the door, a precaution that Rachel found both reassuring and heartbreaking. Even here, in a hospital surrounded by people, they couldn't yet feel completely safe. Rayleigh drifted in and out of sleep, occasionally murmuring words that Rachel couldn't quite catch. Each time she stirred, Rachel would lean close, stroking her hair and whispering reassurances until she settled again. Near midnight, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Detective Alvarez, looking exhausted but determined. He spoke briefly with the officer on duty before approaching Rachel. "How is she?" he asked quietly, nodding toward Rayleigh's sleeping form. "Recovering," Rachel replied. "The drugs should wear off by morning. Physically, she'll be okay." Alvarez nodded, pulling a second chair alongside Rachel's. "I know this isn't the best time, but I thought you'd want an update on what's happening." Rachel straightened, fully alert despite her exhaustion. "Please." "We've secured the entire facility on Portsmouth Island," Alvarez began. "Leo Barbos and 12 others are in custody, including the men who kidnapped you and Rayleigh. We've seized all the printing equipment, computers, and distribution materials, along with financial records that should help us track down others involved in the network." "What about the children?" Rachel asked. "Rayleigh mentioned there were others." "We found 8 children being held at a house close to the factory after a tip from Mavi," Alvarez confirmed grimly. "Ages 7 to 12, some reported missing as long as 2 years ago. They're receiving medical attention now, and we're contacting their families." Rachel closed her eyes briefly, imagining the reunions that would soon take place. Other parents experiencing the same overwhelming relief she had felt when she found Rayleigh at the ferry terminal months ago. "And Mavi?" she asked. "The man who helped me escape?" "Cooperating fully," Alvarez said. "He's provided names, dates, locations, information that will be invaluable in dismantling what remains of this network. He'll face charges, but his assistance and the fact that he saved your life will be considered during sentencing." Rachel nodded, conflicted about the man who had both contributed to her family's destruction and helped save what remained of it. "What about Barbos? What's he saying?" Alvarez's expression hardened. "Not much yet, but with the evidence we've seized and the testimony of those willing to talk, he's facing multiple life sentences. He won't see the outside of a prison again." Rachel felt a grim satisfaction at that. It wouldn't bring Millie back or erase what Rayleigh had endured, but at least the man who had orchestrated so much suffering would spend the rest of his life confined, just as he had confined his victims. Rachel looked at Rayleigh's sleeping form, a surge of fierce pride swelling in her chest. Even after everything she had endured, her daughter's courage had made a difference, not just for herself, but for countless others. "When can we go home?" she asked, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. "Not for a while yet," Alvarez admitted. "There will be more statements to give, identifications to make, potentially more testimony as we build cases against everyone involved. But we'll make it as easy on both of you as possible. You've both been through an unimaginable ordeal," Alvarez said. He stood, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You should rest. I'll have officers stationed outside around the clock." After Alvarez left, Rachel settled more comfortably in her chair, keeping her hand on Rayleigh's. Despite the pain from her injuries and the hard plastic of the hospital chair, she soon drifted into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in months, secure in the knowledge that the people who had torn apart her family were finally facing justice.